Okay, so let's talk about farming. Let's talk about productive commercial farming. In other words, not just a farm where I go and look out to the distance, but a farm that actually produces something. Either it's something that's grown, or it's livestock, or it's something. You know, this obsession we have with the land. Let's talk about the figure that everybody hears about, and that is that 70% of the commercial farmland is in white hands. 40,122 commercial farms. That's the number that keeps on getting touted out. And that's because it's using numbers that come from the 2017, yes, 8 years ago, land audit. And now let me explain to you why we are using figures that are so old. Because there's a dirty little secret about South African farming. And that is, let's take that figure to be correct. Certainly, let's say it was correct in 2017. It's certainly not correct now, but, you know, doesn't suit the government to update the figure. But let's assume that the number is still relevant. What was excluded in that land audit, on purpose, is that 92,634 households practice commercial farming, but they weren't included in that land audit. Okay? Why weren't they included in that land audit? Because they wanted to talk about commercial farming. Now, one could say that you've got a commercial farm, so in other words, that's your business, and everybody was cool. They wanted that number to reflect as big a white ownership as possible, so they've got a big target to go to. But what they're saying is that these 92,634 households that also farm shouldn't be included, because that's not the primary aim of the farm. We're talking about people that are basically living on small holdings and farming and selling the produce and living off that. Now, in the great South African mindset, that's not commercial farming. But wait, hang on a second. There is another 109,465 households that farm as a secondary source of income. So in other words, I own a farm, we produce maize on a small scale, we sell it, but I also work in town as an insurance salesman. So the maize is my secondary form of income. But that's not included in the land audit. So it starts raising the question here. Why would the state not want to include these farmers in their land audit? Why would they not want to recognize them as farmers? I think we're getting very close to the same argument which has been raised recently by the Capitec CEO, Gerry Fourie, that said, perhaps our unemployment rate isn't 32% because it excludes people that are living off what we call in South Africa the informal economy, what everybody else in the world would call the economy. In other words, these are people that work. They get money. The reason that Mr. Fourie said that perhaps the number isn't so bad is because he is seeing bank accounts that get a regular fee paid, put into that, a regular amount of money put into those bank accounts every month. But that's not being deemed to be a salary. That person is running a car wash, or they renting out houses, rooms in the back of their house, or they are running a informal tavern or whatever. But they're falling under the radar because they're not a formal business. We have got a problem in South Africa of a government that doesn't want to be honest with the numbers. And it's time that we got honest with the numbers, because this is tearing the country apart. Because political parties go out there, sing songs, on the basis that 70% of the farms are owned by one racial group, when in actual fact, it's more like 20% of the farms. It may be a big portion of land, because they're commercial farms, but it's not what is being said in the land audit. So I'm saying that we've got to do two things. We've got to try and force this government to update their land audit, because to work on figures from 2017 is ridiculous. And also to be a little bit more honest about how they derive these numbers, because these numbers are divisive, they cause problems in the country, and they are not true. So let's think about it the next time somebody says 70% of the farms are owned by whites. That's nowhere near the truth. And I think it's time that we started to be truthful about what the real picture looks like. We'll see you again on the Political Insider.